His take on this is Roger Altman. He's the former Deputy Treasury Secretary and the founder and chairman of Evercore Partners. And Roger, it's great to see you this morning.
Nice to see you, Becky.
I see that you are feeling a little more optimistic about the climate in Washington. What's happened to change that?
Well, I think the climate has changed enormously from the days of denial when no one wanted to talk about long-term deficit reduction at all to the present environment where it's topic A. And I think the message from the voters last November, together with the very good work of the Bowles-Simpson Commission, has contributed to that. But it's a new day on this question in Washington, and that's a good thing.
Meaning you are happy to see the idea of them looking at cuts and trying to find ways to compromise?
Well, meaning that all of a sudden, over the last couple of months, the issue of how to reduce the deficit is the core question instead of whether to reduce it. Now, I think that the debate right now, which is over the amount of cuts in the current year's budget, 2011, is a bit of a sideshow because, you know, they've cut $4 billion so far as a price for extending the continuing resolution. The Democrats apparently have offered another $6.5 billion. The Republicans want another $57 billion. That's the bid and the ask. But the real issue is this huge overhanging threat of the long term, and exactly how much they cut this year is, as I say, a bit of a sideshow. I'm hoping that the two sides will really engage on long-term deficit reduction, and I was encouraged by the comments that Speaker Boehner made to the Wall Street Journal at the end of last week, when he said the Republican side, or at least in the House, is going to put forward a budget for next year, which takes on Medicare and Medicaid, because we all know that there is no such thing as long-term deficit reduction without addressing entitlement growth on the one hand and new revenues on the other.
Roger, our guest host today is Senator Pat Toomey. And Senator, you and Roger come from opposite sides of the aisle, but the messages that the two of you have said today don't sound all that different.
Well, I think Roger's right. There is a whole new level of awareness. Certainly when I served in the House, which I left in the end of 2004, there was nowhere near the prevalence of the understanding of how serious this problem is and the need to deal with it. I'm wondering if Roger supports the idea of some kind of structural or systemic or process reforms, whether it's statutory spending caps or another mechanism that might put a little more pressure on Congress to get spending under control.
Well, actually, I do, because the one of the real reasons, or big reasons, that this country achieved budget surpluses actually in the late 90s, first time in 54 years, was the tight budget controls on a statutory basis that existed then. In particular, the hard caps on domestic discretionary spending and the real pay-go system, which we then had, which then lapsed when President George W. Bush took office, and have not, in a real sense, been reimposed since. So yes, I would support that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that's an area that we can go. I'm not convinced that Congress has the self-discipline to do this job unless there are some kind of sort of, you know, extraneous, some kind of outside structural limitations on spending. So I hope we can get there.
Well, it can't just be spending, Senator. It has to be both. It has to also affect revenues. You know, we had a true pay-go system in the mid and late 90s. It worked very well. If you cut taxes, you have to make it up elsewhere so that the impact is budget neutral. Well, I know that your side has never been enthusiastic about that, right, but you can't have real budget controls without addressing both the revenue side and the spending side, well, and of course you know that.
Well, I have to disagree with that. I would point to a couple of years during the Bush administration where spending was slightly below 20% of GDP, and we were running budget deficits. We got down as low as 1.2% of GDP, and they weren't even really trying very hard to control spending. So I think we've got enough revenue. I think we should make the current tax rates permanent, with the exception, as we discussed earlier, of actually lower corporate and lower capital gains taxes. And we've got to get spending under control, including the entitlements. I think that maximizes economic growth and restores fiscal balance. Roger?
Well, we have an honest disagreement over this issue of whether you can do the entire thing on the spending side. Of course you can't. The entire thing meaning truly reduce our long-term deficits, and in particular stabilize the debt to GDP ratio, which has to be the key to this, because you know, our debt has exploded as a nation and is reaching really threatening levels. But to do that, we need about 2% ongoing annual deficit reduction, Becky, that's about $300 billion a year. Some people say it could be a little less, but let's use that number as a round number, $300 billion a year. You can't do all that on the spending side, and I just don't know any independent expert from any side of the aisle who believes that you can do that, all on spending.
Roger, let me ask you, the idea that both sides of the aisle seem to be coming around to this idea that something needs to be done about the massive budget deficits, and as you said, it's a question of how to cut that budget deficit, not whether. Is that disrupted at all, that message, by rising oil prices and the pressure that consumers are feeling at the pump right now? Gas prices up about 33 cents a gallon just in the last 2 weeks.
I don't think it's disrupted in any medium and long-term way, Becky. No. Yes, rising gasoline prices and rising crude prices, which cause gasoline prices to go up, is a concern for every American, because when you see gas at $3.50 a gallon and you just work through the numbers in terms of what it means for household budgets, it's really a problem. But I think the American public are pretty focused now on the degree to which our budget is a mess and has to be fixed. And I don't think this problem of higher gasoline prices is going to really distract the public, because the momentum from last November, and as I say, some other things like Bowles-Simpson, is pretty strong. Now, this is a tough issue, and I'm not here to say, wow, they're just about to solve it. I'm just hopeful because the environment has changed so much in Washington.
All right. Well, Roger, we want to thank you very much for your time. We hope you'll come back again soon. And again, that's Roger Altman. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
When we come back, it's the trade you've been waiting for, how oil, gold, and the dollar are affecting equities in your portfolio. We'll take a closer look at commodities and the trade for this Monday morning, so stay tuned.